Hey everyone, welcome to the September 1st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and we are looking ahead, well, to the end of summer as the Saratoga meet's winding down. The same is true for Del Mar, and that's what we're going to focus on this podcast out west, as one of the last few weekends of Del Mar always marks the Pacific Classic, and it's a stacked card on Saturday at Del Mar on this Pacific Classic day. Undercard, 5 stakes races comprising the late pick 5 sequence. We're going to discuss all of those races 7 through 11 on Saturday at Del Mar. The Del Mar Mile, the Torrey Pines, the Green Flash, the Pacific Classic, and then rounding things out with the Del Mar Handicap and all stakes sequence. And Craig, it's not easy. There are some big fields signed on, interesting races to handicap, a lot going on here.
They're all big fields. They're all competitive. I personally would be hard pressed to find a single in any of these races. Not that I look for singles, but just when you have fields this big, you're going to have to narrow some of these races down and leave out some horses that you probably know have a chance to win, but it's just that deep and tough of a card.
Yeah, it's funny how racing schedules have changed over the past several years. It seems like now the first week in September is when a lot of horses are doing some of their final Breeders' Cup preparations, and you could imagine some of the horses that we're going to be talking about are prepping for Breeders' Cup races later in the year. I think that's especially true of some of the horses that are starting in the Pacific Classic. So we're going to go through this and talk about some of these races. I know we already did a stakes preview of one of them, so I kind of have a little bit of a preview of where Craig might go in one of those races, but a lot to dive into here, and I think a lot to discuss. So let's begin with race 7. It is the Del Mar Mile. This one is a grade 2 event going the 1 mile distance on the turf course. And something we talk about quite a bit, Craig, when we are handicapping Del Mar is how important trips are. And we do have some large fields in a few of these turf races. Saving ground and getting the right trip is so critical. So we're going to try to project how these races are going to be run a little bit to see what the flow is going to be like and who's going to be able to save that valuable ground around the turns of these races. This is one where, I mean, it feels like there isn't very much speed signed on. I think that the number 7, I'm a Gambler, as the pace projector indicates, is the one that's most likely to go forward in this race. He's not exactly a front runner though, so this pace scenario and deciding who's going to get the right trip in this race, it's kind of tough to wrap your head around.
It is. We have him shown on a clear lead in the pace projector, and just as I scan the rest of the PPs, I have no argument with that. And I think it would probably be a good move to take him to the front. He didn't run bad last time when he pressed a pretty fast pace, took over, wasn't able to hold off a few horses late, but I actually think I'm a Gambler is pretty dangerous in here because of that pace projector.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He is kind of a funny horse. I mean, was really on the rise in Europe last year, racing in Great Britain and Ireland, winning a series of handicap and stakes races, really winning 4 of his last 5 races overseas. He sold at auction at the end of last year for $1 million US, which to me is just insane for a gelding, a horse with the kind of resume he had. I mean, I guess the connection decided that they thought he had a lot of upside. It hasn't quite panned out for him yet in the US, but I think you can give him some excuses. I mean, his first start in the country, it was not a bad effort. He was arguably a little disappointing given how much money he took in that race, but then he was off for a long time, came off the layoff in the Wicker last time, and I actually thought ran pretty well within the context of that race. It was kind of coming apart a little bit at the end. He seemed like he was somewhat keen off the layoff, racing forwardly from an outside post position. He got there at the top of the stretch, just couldn't contain a couple of closers late. I would expect him to take a step forward second off the layoff, and that might be good enough to put him in the mix here to potentially win this race.
Yeah, I agree. He's actually my top pick. I didn't want to get too early on that, but I think he's got a real shot, and I do think he's going to be a price. Seeing that he's lost to several horses in this field already in his 2 North American starts, so I think he does have a shot and will offer some value. So he will be on my tickets. Not sure what direction you want to go, so I'll just put out another horse that I'm interested in. That's also going to be a price. It's a horse we talked about on the Pacecast when he won his allowance race last time, and that's Twist for John Sadler. He does draw a little bit outside, so I'm worried that he could get caught wide. I mean, that's obviously always a danger. but I really like what I've seen from him since he's come in this country. First time out, he was in a race with very little pace. Ran a pretty good second, but he took a nice jump forward last time. It was a race that had a pretty quick pace, but he was upright on it, made a move to seize command, was able to hold off some others in that allowance race. So he just seems like another horse who's moving in the right direction in a race that just has a lot of the same horses we've seen over and over again in Southern California and just frankly haven't been that good.
Yeah, Twist does have to work out a trip from that outside post position, but you're right. I mean, he was impressive last time. Like you said, we talked about that race a little bit on the pace cast after it was run. He showed a tendency to drift out, and I don't know if it was just him. I was kind of maybe positing that there was some lighting situation going on at Del Mar that day because a couple horses bolted in that race, which seems very odd. And just watching the race on replay, it seemed like there was a lot of sun shining from a weird angle, and it looked like Twist just was reacting to something coming to the top of the stretch because he drifted out coming to the lane, and then again in this stretch was really moving out towards the outside rail. So you don't love to see that tendency. He didn't do it in his first start in this country. Obviously took a big step forward last time. It's a move up in class for him, but he is a new face, and I think one you can consider. Craig, I'm not going to make some big case against the morning line favorite and here the number 4 Exalted. I mean, you could say he is also kind of a new face in this division because he's only run on turf 4 times and has kind of just ascended into stakes company in his last couple of starts, and he's proven best against some of the more familiar faces that we've seen in this division. He's got a great running style for this race. He doesn't want to be on the lead, but he's got that tactical speed where he can sit in a stalking position. He's likely to save ground from the post position he's drawn in, and he just makes a lot of sense in this race. I mean, he's not running speed figures that make him any kind of standout, and he's probably going to be a short price in this spot, but I still think he's one of the more likely winners.
Yeah, he can definitely win. You said the one reservation I have is the speed figures, but it's not like this is the strongest race. It's a race rating of 120. He's approached that, so he could win for sure. He's just not going to offer much value. But if you're trying to get through the race, I imagine you want to have him on your tickets. The one other horse I wanted to mention is the 3 count again. He's a horse who has run good speed figures in the past. He's shipped around, not without a lot of success, but he's run some decent races and some big figures. And I don't want to totally write him off that last race where there were 4 Phil D'Amato horses in the race. They comprised the Superfecta, and it just looked like from the second the gate opened, Count Again was just kind of out for a prep to me. Just dropped straight to the back. Was asked, made a nice little move on the turn while saving ground. Flattened out late, second off a very long layoff. I don't want to totally dismiss his chances.
Yeah, Count Again at his best, there's no doubt he is the superior to the horses in this race. I mean, he's run a series of speed figures that would make him too tough for this field to handle. He was off for a really long time. I mean, he missed most of 2022 after winning that Grade 1 Shoemaker Mile, and you never like to see that when a horse basically reaches the apex of their form and then disappears for a year. That's not a good sign. And then he came back off the layoff last time, like you said, ran okay. I mean, he was pretty far back early in that race, but got a rail run into the stretch and just kind of didn't produce that electrifying kick that we're used to seeing from this horse. I mean, he's always finishing at the end of his races when he's in form, and he just wasn't really picking it up last time. He also was hanging on his left lead, which isn't something I really remember from this horse. So I'm a little concerned about this 8-year-old who has been pretty lightly campaigned throughout his career. I mean, for an 8-year-old to have just made 18 total starts, I mean, he's obviously had his fair share of issues over time. So we'll see if he can get back to his best form. He's certainly come back off layoffs and, gotten back to it in the past, but he's getting up there in age now. So I wasn't so sure about him. Yeah, I mean, I've had a thing for De Jour in the past, Craig, but I feel like last time maybe was the time to have him because he got such a great trip and ride from Juan Hernandez that day, coming through between horses after saving ground. He's been a frustrating horse because he's got the talent to win a race like this, but his been a little up and down this year. Sometimes he gets the trips and doesn't deliver, so I couldn't totally trust him. And I mean, there are others you can make a case for in this race, like Balnikov, the other Phil D'Amato runner, but he's another one who just has no early speed whatsoever, and if they're not really moving up front, it's going to work against a horse like him.
Yeah, both of those are ones like I mentioned in the beginning. There are horses that you can't use them all. And you know, those horses wouldn't shock me if they won, particularly Du Jour, who's going to get a good ground saving trip, you would think. Not sure if he's going to get the pace, but sometimes that doesn't matter on turf. But you can only use so many. Even Visitin is kind of a newcomer who ships in, kind of a turf, a synthetic specialist. There's just a lot going on in this race. I'm going to try to keep it down to three or four horses.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. Race 8 is the Grade 3 Torrey Pines, this one going the mile distance on the main track for the 3-year-old fillies. And Craig, this is one we already talked about. We did a DRF Stakes preview on this race, and it's a wide open field. I think we both agreed on that. You can make a case for a lot of runners in this race. The number 9, Fisa, I think, is going to be the favorite in here. I'm just looking at the morning line for the first time, and she's 8-5. I mean, she is a horse that figures to take a lot of money just based on her overall resume, having won the first 5 starts of her career for Bob Baffert. Obviously disappointed last time in the Black-Eyed Susan, but I'm not going to be too hard on her for finishing behind horses like Taxed and Hoosier Philly, who would obviously be major players against a field like this. But now she's coming off a layoff. She's drawn outside, going this mile distance, and I feel like a lot of handicappers are just going to default to her, but I'm not sure I totally trust her to either pick up her form or even develop further from where she was.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one. As you mentioned earlier, we did a race preview on this. I picked her second. I certainly am not conceding the race to her by any means. And you talked about the workout, which looks really shiny on paper. I think it's a first out of 80 some horses. Good time. But when I went and watched it, as you kind of noted, that's why I went and watched it. It just wasn't all that pretty to look at. So I don't want to totally dismiss FISA, but there's some others I'm interested in here. And as you know, on that preview, my top pick was the 6 horse Anywho, a horse who I think is just really wants to go 2 turns, even though she's run fine in sprints before. She's actually 2 for 3 with a neck loss in the other, and her worst performance was in the Grade 2 Summer Oaks, but I really think she had a very tough trip that day and just didn't get any chance to show what she really has. And I think this one's sitting on a really big race, and she should get plenty of pace. I didn't mention the pace projector. We will as we get through some of these horses. There's definitely some speed in here, and I think it's going to be to her benefit as well. So there's a couple others I want to use, but I'm really high on Anywho in here.
Yeah, I've got no problem at all with Anywho, who I agree with everything you said. I mean, she just had that extremely wide trip in the Summertime Oaks. I mean, legitimately 4 wide around both turns of that race. You just can't do that and be successful at Santa Anita. So I think she's likely to do better here, especially now that she's had some races under her belt consistently, stretching back out in distance. Interesting they're putting the blinkers on her, but maybe that's just to add a little more focus after she got run down the wire last time. I mean, Craig, I think another horse that's going to take money in this race that you have to make some decisions about is the number 10 Ceiling Crusher. She's a horse kind of like Fisa, who, I mean, started off her career with a win streak, winning races impressively, albeit against California breds, but I don't think it really matters who she was running against in those spots because she was running some fast times and winning by huge margins, especially 2 and 3 back, 15 and 17 length victories with speed figures in the 110 plus range, which is just superior to what anybody else in this field has run. I think you have to be a little concerned about the last race when she lost as the 1-5 favorite, and a horse like Chismosa, who she defeated by 17 lengths in her prior start, turned the tables on her. I will say, I didn't love the ride she got in that race. I mean, they were not aggressive with her for some reason and took her back and I think rode her a little overconfidently, putting her behind horses the entire way. Didn't seem to react well to that kind of style. So I would imagine they're going to get more aggressive with her this time, but can she bounce back?
She's a tough call for me. And really, I only wanted to use 3 horses in this race the more I looked at it. And to me, it came down to third horse was going to be either Pfizer or Ceiling Crusher. And the more I look at it, I just have a little more faith in Fisa being able to get the job done here. Ceiling Crusher, I agree. She's probably going to be more aggressive from that 10 post. I think she almost has to. The problem is the horse to the inside that I know I'll turn it over to you to talk about more is in Flying Connection, who is just inside her and just a really fast filly who, if she does try to outrun her, that's probably not going to work out very well.
Yeah, Flying Connection, the number 3, is pretty quick and didn't get to show her speed last time when they came off the layoff and tried turf in the San Clemente. Just didn't break that sharply and then, got a little keen early. Just didn't seem to get a comfortable trip that day. And also, just not a turf horse. And I think now they're getting back to the right surface with her. She was in great form earlier this season. I mean, you could question what she was beating at Sunland through the springtime, but she ran respectively well in the Kentucky Oaks 2-back, set a strong pace that day, and only lost to some of the top fillies in the country, like Pretty Mischievous Gambling Girl and Wet Paint. I mean, that performance holds up pretty well against this field, and turning back to the mile from the 9 furlongs in the Oaks, I think is going to suit her really well, and she's drawn inside, which I think is a real advantage against some of the other speed rivals that are all drawn in outside post positions. So I think that Flying Connection is likely to get the right kind of trip here. And we've seen Todd Fincher bring some pretty live horses to Delmar over the past couple seasons. So I think Flying Connection makes a lot of sense. I don't know if she's going to be 15-1 in this race, but I would love it if she was.
Yeah, that really surprised me when I saw the morning line. I mean, maybe she'll be double digits. I don't know if she'll quite be 15-1. I would suspect more in the 8-1 range, but I think she's really dangerous, and she would be the other horse I'm going to have on my tickets because if Ceiling Crusher isn't able to really hound her and make her go too fast, there's just not a ton of other speed in here. The horse we have shown third on the pace projector, Pink Ace, is showed some speed in a sprint race last time, but that was just much weaker field than what she's facing here. Huge step up in class, and horses like that, they tend to get lost early in the race, even when they look like they should be closer coming out of sprints. It usually doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, and with so much speed in the race, I think some are going to be tempted to look to the number 1, Justique, as maybe the best closer in the field. And I get that view, but like we were talking about when we did our stakes preview, Craig, two things. I'm not sure how good she is, and also I strongly suspect that she's more of a one-turn horse. I mean, they keep trying to go the 2 turns with her, and she's just had a much more potent kick in the shorter races. Some of that does have to do with pace, so maybe the fact that she's getting more pace in a 2-turn mile might suit her a little better. I just wonder if she's good enough to beat a field like this.
Yeah, I don't think she is. I mean, the speed figures certainly say she is not. And there's also that question of the turns. They say she's 2 for 2 with 2 easy wins sprinting, and she's only run a couple of well-beaten thirds in force when she's tried routing. Last time was not impressed at all with that fourth as the 8-5. I think she was the favorite if memory serves, but just yeah, she always takes money. She won't be 8-1 in here. I mean, she just takes money every single time out. There'll be people that see all the speed and latch on to her again, and she's just not for me.
Yeah, I kind of get that same sense that she can get bet down off that morning line. So, interesting addition to the Torrey Pines. I mean, I think some are going to default to Fisa, but Craig and I both believe it's a little more wide open than that. Let's move on to race 9, back to the turf course. It is the grade 3 Green Flash handicap, this one going just 5 furlongs on the grass. And, Craig, refresh my memory. Do we even use the fast pace flag in 5 furlong races? I can't remember if we do, because I feel like this race might have gotten it if we have that coded in for, as a possibility in 5 furlong races, because there is so much speed signed on in this field.
Yes, we do not use that label for 5 furlong races. It just, we used to way back in the beginning of Timeform US, but there were just way too many races at this distance we were tagging as fast pace, and the pace would be fast and horses would still go wire to wire, or sitting second or third a length off the pace. So we just didn't want to give the impression that these were races where you wanted to look for deep closers. Not that they can't win, but they don't have any particular advantage because the pace is going to be strong. It just always is at 5 furlongs.
Yeah, I think that's something important to note if you're looking at the pace projector. And I mean, I'm not sure who's going to make the lead in here, Craig, but I'm sure they're going to have to work pretty hard to get there, because the number 1, Fast Buck, who's not even shown on the lead on the pace projector, I mean, he can really fly in the early stages of his races, and you have to imagine he's going to be gunning from the inside. Kid Corleone, if he transfers his speed to the turf, he'll be up there early. And then you've got a horse like the number 7, Noble Reflection, who is extremely fast in the early stages of his races. We'll see if he can hold it together. And even, on the outside, Bus Buck, buzz. What do you do with a horse like that who's trying turf for the first time but has quite a bit of early speed? It just feels like something has to give in this race.
Yeah, there's a ton, and obviously all the horses can't be on the lead, so there'll be some shuffling around. It's a tough pace projector. I don't have any problem with the pace projector. I think it did a nice job in this race. I suspect Fast Buck might be the one if he breaks. He's shown a little further back because he's been running in further distance races, just because they've been at Santa Anita. But if he had been running in all 5 furlong races, I imagine he'd be shown a lot closer. But that said, despite my spiel about the pace projector and not using the fast pace flag, I landed on a long shot in here that I think's going to make a nice strong run in the end after a good setup, and that's the 9 horse Cherubic Factor. I just really liked what I saw from him last race. He's a horse who has been steadily progressing, getting better and better speed figures. And when you see that 115 speed figure last time, it looks a little on the low side, but it was a pretty good allowance race. There's been some good run backs out of that race. The runner up has already come back to win. The fifth place horse ran second yesterday. But what caught me the most was it's a trip that you could be of two minds. One, he saved a ton of ground and just sat there and blocked in, had nowhere to go. He got through, so you might be able to say, well, he got a perfect trip and won the race. But he was held up for a pretty long time, and I was just really impressed with how game he was and how easily he was able to come through what was a pretty tight hole. And he just seems like a horse who's going to offer value that I really liked what I saw and is going to get a good setup.
Yeah, no argument on him being a closer in this race that projects to feature a lot of pace. I watched that race and I was kind of going in the other direction with my thought process on it. Like, yeah, if you bet him that day, it was a real nail biter of a trip because it looked like he wasn't going to get there for a long time. But I mean, eventually that the rail opened up. I mean, the thing they have at Del Mar is that that dog leg chute coming into the stretch, and it kind of adds a little bit of a break to the rail, the inside rail, and it gives closers trying to come up the rail a bit of an opportunity to find that extra lane for the final eighth of a mile. And you could tell Juan Hernandez knew it was coming, and he was just waiting for that path to open up. And when it finally did, Cherubic Factor had the horse to go through. I mean, not all horses can accelerate that quickly to get there, but it was a trip that was nerve-wracking to watch, but it worked out. So I don't know if I want to upgrade him off that or not. But he's definitely a horse that's in form and is moving, in the right direction and will be a price in this race. I was kind of leading towards some more proven commodities that can come from off the pace. A horse like the number 3, Turn on the Jets. He won an optional claiming allowance race that I thought was just overall much stronger than the one that Cherubic Factor comes out of. He also faced Beer Can Man that day, who I think has a shot in here as well. Though Beer Can Man is a horse that prefers to race up closer to the pace, and I wonder how he's going to react to maybe getting shuffled a little further back than he really wants to be. So I was looking more towards Turn on the Jets out of that race. And then, Lane Way, I don't see too much wrong with him coming back off a layoff for Richard Mandela. Obviously has to be ready to go off the long break, but I'd imagine he's the kind of horse that they're looking towards a race like the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, so they're trying to get some kind of prep into him. We'll see if he's cranked up for his best here, but he's one that I could understand taking a look at. And then I think the horse that makes the most sense in this race is the number 8, Motorius. He just fits the race really well. He's a closer, he handles the distance, and he's proven his class against tougher horses like last time in that turf sprint at Churchill when he was making that strong late run after no balls, who would obviously stack up really well in a race like this. He was in great form when he went to the sidelines for trainer Phil D'Amato, but it's not like this is a long layoff that concerns me. They just wanted to take some time off and probably gear up for the latter half of the season. So Motorius would probably be the one that I'm leaning on the most in this race because I just think he fits the race really well.
Yeah, I have no issue with all of those. I mean, it's certainly a race that I'm going to spread a little bit. It's just, yeah, I was looking for a little longer price for my top pick, but I would certainly be using those. I won't be using the speed horses. Will I be shocked if one of them runs away from the others early and wins? Maybe a little bit, but we've all seen it happen before. But I just got to trust what I see on paper, and I think it's going to get pretty hot. The one horse who's probably going to take money that I'm not interested in is Bran. who's coming in off a year layoff, and he has a decent style for a race like this. It seems like to me he's going to take a little too much money, and that this one might be a prep. I think he probably prefers longer distances.
Yeah, we'll see about that. The 5 furlongs is certainly shorter than he's ever run before. I will say, I looked up the stats for trainer John Sadler, and he actually has good numbers off layoffs like this in turf sprints over the past 5 years, plus 180 days in turf sprints. He's 11 for 47, 23% with a $2.04 ROI. So, I mean, he can win with horses like this. It's not an ideal post position, and he's not exactly a horse that wants to come from way off the pace. Though he was successful using that style last time at Kentucky Downs, but then again, last time was a year ago, almost to the day. So I mean, it's a pretty substantial layoff for this horse. He's one that I could use if he's the right price. I mean, obviously we won't see what prices there are if we're playing a pick 5 sequence, but really he's not the kind of horse that I would want to take here if he was getting bet too much. So I kind of agree with your sentiments, Craig, that I'd be somewhat surprised if a horse is able to shake loose enough to win this race on the front end. So I'm kind of looking at horses that can come from off the pace, and I don't have the strongest opinion about who it's going to be that gets the right trip, but I do want to spread a little bit among those that will be making those runs in the stretch. Let's move on to the feature race at Del Mar on Saturday. Race 10 is the Grade 1 Pacific Classic, going the 1.25 mile distance on the main track. And it's kind of an interesting situation here, Craig, because we've been kind of commenting on it for a while now that the older horse division in general is not the toughest, and especially out west right now. I mean, horses like Defunded or Senior Buscador, I don't know if we really consider them to be among the top horses in the handicap division. So it is one of those years where it feels like things are kind of open for a good 3-year-old to maybe beat their older rivals in the second half of the season. And this is the first kind of preview of what we're going to see later on in the Breeders' Cup Classic, with the 3-year-olds stepping up against the best older rivals, at least on the West Coast. And I gotta say, handicapping this race, the 3-year-olds look pretty tough.
I was going to say the same thing. We've been talking about it all year. The older horse division has not been very strong. I think the 3-year-old division has been pretty strong, and I mean, I didn't get lazy on this race and just default to the 3-year-olds. I went through all of them horse by horse, and I just had a very hard time trying to make a case for any of the older horses. I won't, in the end, I won't have any of them on my tickets, and I'm just going to default to the 3-year-olds. Now, I do have some preferences among them. I actually prefer Arabian Night to the others in here. I really liked what I saw from the Haskell, even though he was beaten by Go Rocket Ride that day. He was the horse who was the very early season Derby favorite, as most will know. Came back in the Haskell. It just seemed like a really tough spot. I think we did that race, and I don't think either one of us particularly liked him coming back in that spot. But I did like how he ran that day, and I think he's going to run a much better effort in here. But I don't want to concede the race to him because Go Rocket Ride was pretty good in the Haskell as well. Both of them have speed figures which are superior to the older horses. They should be getting better, and those will be my two keys in the race. But I don't want to totally dismiss Skinner. At first, I did want to dismiss Skinner because I was not impressed with his last race at Los Al at all. And then I just heard myself in my head saying, remember, what happens at Los Al stays at Los Al. And I also think there's a decent amount of speed in here, which could set him up. And I think John Sadler he's mentioned a few other races, but I think this is the one that's really been circled on the calendar all along. And if he's ready to go and things do get hot up front, I wouldn't be surprised. And the 10-1 morning line surprised me, and maybe that's swaying me a little to be more confident about him. If you think you're going to get 10-1, I'm a little iffy on that one, but in the end, like I said, it's just going to be the 3-year-olds.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning in a similar direction with regard to taking the 3-year-olds, and my order of preference is probably similar to yours, Craig. Though I will say, I have not been the biggest believer in Go Rocket Ride really all along. It's just something about the way this horse runs. He's kind of more scrappy than he is, just exuding natural talent. He needs to be asked a lot in his races to really get there, but he's gritty and he tries hard. And I think I discounted how, his competitive spirit would really kick in last time in the Haskell, because he hadn't really run, that kind of speed figure that suggested he could beat a field like that. But when the chips were down, he's the horse that stepped up and really showed up on the day. And I think you have to give him a lot of credit for that. He's a horse that can make his own trip. He's got that good tactical speed. He's drawn well inside. And, watching his workouts for this race, like I have for all of his races, I was kind of getting ready to downgrade him a little bit, because he's a horse that needs a lot of riding in the morning. If you're not riding him, he's not going anywhere. But that's just this horse, and you kind of have to have a history of knowing how these horses typically behave when you watch the workouts. So I was downgrading him for that earlier in the year, and I now realize that was a mistake. That's just the way he is, and he runs that way in his races, but he gets there. So I think Go Rocket Ride is going to be really tough in this race, but like you, I do think that Arabian Night is likely to take a step forward this time off the Haskell. The most interesting part of the Haskell to me was the gallop out, because I don't want to put too much stock in gallop outs for experienced horses, but this horse just kind of gave up the lead readily around the far turn, like he was going to finish nowhere. And then once they got into the stretch, Don Velasquez kind of gave him a crack at the whip, and you could see this horse kind of re-engaged a little bit and realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm not done running yet. And he was actually gaining ground on Mage as they crossed the wire, and then galloped out quickly right ahead of those top two finishers into the clubhouse turn. So it almost felt like he ran in spots a little bit in that race, and I think we're going to see a more complete professional effort from Arabian Night here. Both of these horses have to prove they can get the 10 furlongs, which is a bit of a question mark, but just based on the way each of them run, I don't have major questions about it with them. So I slightly prefer Arabian Night. I do suspect a lot of people are going to have that view, though, Craig, so I'm not going to be surprised if the odds kind of flip-flop on these two horses, and Go Rocket Ride is actually the bigger price of the two of them. I'd almost expect that, actually. Given the way they were bet last time in the Haskell, where there was such a spread between them. So, I think that they have similar chances of winning this race, so I'm not going to lean too heavily on Arabian Night, because I think the value might lie more with Go Rocket Ride once again this time. As for Skinner, I hear what you're saying with regard to hit the Los Alamitos race maybe not being a true line on his form. I'm still a little bit bothered about the way that they've handled this horse so gingerly since that scratch from the Kentucky Derby. They were planning to run in a race earlier, and I think they either didn't enter or scratched, I forgot. Then they finally ran at Los Al, skipped some other targets they were talking about. Now they're in the Pacific Classic. I know that the trainer, John Sheriffs, has always said that he wants this horse to go a mile and a quarter. He kind of says, oh, he's a Curlin, we're supposed to go a mile and a quarter. I know I've said this before. When I watch this horse run, when I look at him physically, he does not look like a horse that wants more ground to me. I think turning him back would have been a much better option, especially given his running style. So he's a horse that I have trouble warming up to in this race. Obviously, if the pace heats up, it helps him. But even at a potentially big price, I'm not sure that he's for me in here. Craig, the one older horse that I would maybe make a case for, not the strongest push, but a soft push in this race, is Stiletto Boy, just because he never gets any respect. And he's probably not even going to be the shortest price of that older contingent. That's probably going to be Defunded, but I don't know. I think the Stiletto Boy is just a better horse than Defunded, and he continually shows up against tough company. He handles a mile and a quarter, as he proved in the Santa Anita Handicap earlier in the year. If an older horse wins this race, I think it's going to be him, and he's not going to be that short a price.
Yeah, he would be the older horse for me. I'm a fan of his from way back in the day. Started out at Prairie Meadows, I believe. One thing we haven't really talked about much was the pace projector, and this is one where it's listed as a fast pace. I'm a little iffy on that when I see the second horse in the pace projector is Slow Down Andy. The third horse is Go Rocket Ride along with Stiletto Boy. Stiletto Boy did show that new dimension when he won the Santa Anita Handicap of being able to come from off the pace a little bit. I think he would need to do that here because of Arabian Night, who I think is clearly going to be the leader. I probably should have made that clear earlier when I was talking about him. I don't think there's any way that Slow Down Andy's even trying for the lead. It's not really been his thing other than the one time he tried turf. So, yeah, if I was going to pick an older horse, we're in the same boat, but I probably would still not include him on my tickets. Maybe if it came race time and I was playing verticals and he drifted up and was 10-1, I might rethink that, but I just, it's hard to project that ahead of time.
Yeah, and we kind of just skipped over the San Diego, which is the local prep for this race. Coming out of there, Senor Buscador and Slow Down Andy. They're decent horses. I've never really viewed either one of them as horses that want a mile and a quarter. And Senior Buscador really got the right trip last time. Slowed Out Andy, I thought, ran the better race, stalking what was an honest pace that really fell apart at the end. But still, I'm just not sure it's the right spot for them. It's a big step up in class. So, I wanted to mention them, but I don't think they're for either of us.
No, I mean, you would say it's the local prep, but in this case, it was more like the Pegasus to the Haskell, where, yeah, it's a prep for the Haskell, but just don't see anybody from that race doing anything in here.
Well, let's round things out with the final leg of this sequence and the final race of the day at Del Mar on Saturday. It is the Grade 2 Del Mar Handicap, mile and 3/8 on the turf course for the older horses. And kind of odd, Craig, for an 11-horse field to see that no speed flag showing up in TimeformUS, but looking through the field, I kind of get it. I mean, there aren't any frontrunners in this race. I mean, I think some horses are going to be ridden forwardly, and I believe that the two that are shown up close on the pace projector are the most likely to go forward in this race, particularly Crosby Beach, who has gone to the front end at different points in the past. That said, there isn't a lot of speed in this race, and I am a little bit leery of some horses that are short prices on the morning line that need to come from pretty far back.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting race for sure. There's some crossover. There's some horses I would have expected in here to be in the Del Mar Mile earlier on the card. I guess we'll start with the pace projector. And the horse we have shown on front in the front, missed the cut. The 4 horse is actually one I'm kind of interested in. He's only tried the dirt here in his North American start since coming over from England with a start in Saudi in between, and I think he really wants turf. He was a horse who showed some promise when he was over in France and England, ran some very nice races there. Not graded stakes type over there, but he could very well be here. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. I do think, given the speed he showed, he is one who, if he's not on the league like we show, he's going to be pretty close up. He's shown the distance is not a problem for him. And I actually think this is a race where the distance does matter because there's a few horses entered in here who, like I said, I was kind of surprised. They just don't really seem to want to go this far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, horses like Calf Can Peak. I mean, a horse that for Phil D'Amato that had some credentials to maybe be in the Del Mar Mile. He's in this race instead, so I have trouble really viewing the distance as being right for him. And then you've got Gold Phoenix, the other Phil D'Amato runner, and he has gone longer in the past. He's very versatile with regard to distance, so I think they could have run him in either race. He was a Grade 1 winner going a mile earlier this year, so maybe it would have made more sense for him to be in the Del Mar Mile, but they're stretching him out instead, Craig. He's the favorite on the morning line. I gotta be honest, I've never been the biggest fan of this horse. I feel like he's been opportunistic when he's won those graded stakes races in the past, maybe against some weaker company. And you could say, sure, this isn't the strongest Del Mar handicap field that we've ever seen, but he's drawn outside. There's not much pace to set up his late run. At a short price, he's not for me in this spot.
No, I agree. And he actually won this race last year, so maybe that's why they're picking this over the mile race. But the horse he beat that day was Masterpiece, who, I mean, is he really a top graded stakes horse these days? I don't see it. So I'm with you on Gold Phoenix. At a short price, I'm using favorites in most of the other legs. I've got no problem tossing this one. I just don't see a good setup for him at all. And I also tend to think he's better going shorter. Yes, he won this race last year in a very weak field, but most of his better races have come at shorter distances.
Yeah, we're viewing him similarly. And, you already brought up the number 4, Missed the Cut, who I think we're going to be in agreement on him, Craig. He's the horse I'd make my top pick in this race if I was making picks. I remember watching the Royal Ascot coverage back in 2022 when he won that Golden Gate Stakes. And, I mean, he was a horse that people were pretty high on back then, thinking that he might have some group stakes races in his future. It didn't quite work out immediately after that, but I mean, he came back in November, and I know that was a race on the all-weather at Lingfield, but he ran a huge time form rating that day, beating a good horse in Algiers, and then, don't fault him for that race in Saudi Arabia that he lost, because, I mean, not only did the trip not work out, he was just wide every step of the way. I think I even remember watching the coverage of that race that he had gotten a little too amped up before the race and then just didn't really get the trip that they were hoping for. And also, turns out losing to a horse like Mostadov is nothing to sneeze at because, I mean, that horse has gone on to win a Group 1 since then. So that was some strong form out of there. And I get why they tried Dirt coming over here. He's a son of Quality Road. He's a colt. If he's able to win stakes on turf and dirt, he's got real stallion potential. But it just didn't work out. He actually ran fine on the dirt. He's just better on the turf, like you said. And I think getting back to a surface like this and stretching out to this distance, having been so proficient going up to 1.25 miles overseas, I think he's really going to like the 1.375 in the US. So he just makes a lot of sense in here. And I think you're going to get a fair enough price, especially with a jockey like Jose Valdivia aboard, who doesn't get that many top mounts these days. So that might hold some people back from really being confident on him in this race, but I like him quite a bit. And Craig, I'm going to make a push for one more horse before I throw it back to you. That is a crazy price on the morning line, but maybe he will be this high. I don't know. The number 1, Win the Day, who's listed at 50-1. This horse has ability, and he's a horse that I've kind of been, had my eye on for a little while, and I've wanted to see him go these longer distances on the turf ever since he ran in some of these races at Del Mar last summer. Those were just optional claiming allowance races, but I thought he really showed that he got the distance those days, and he improved on his prior form going shorter distances, both on the the dirt and the turf. He really wanted the marathons. And then they switched him to the dirt, and I get why they did that. The dirt marathon division is pretty weak, and he actually ran pretty well in the Tokyo City. Obviously was no match for Next when he stepped up against Tough Company next time out in the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. But then they went back to shorter distances at Turfway and then Aqueduct, and just didn't work out. He's coming off a long layoff here, but he's getting back into the right kind of spot. Marathon on the turf. That's what this horse wants to do. And I find it pretty interesting that Doug O'Neill is picking out such an ambitious spot for him when he obviously has allowance conditions available to him. I mean, he's only won 2 races, so he can get into an N2X, but they're trying this graded stakes instead. He's drawn well on the inside, and he's going to be a big price in this race, so he's one that I'm pretty interested in.
Me too. When I looked at this race and saw 50-1, I almost just glossed over him, and then I looked through the PPs, and my first thought was this horse isn't going to be 50-1, but he is going to be a long shot for sure. I mean, he's a horse to me who clearly does not like dirt as much as he does dirt and even synthetic. His turf races were as a 3-year-old, a September 3-year-old. He's a 4-year-old now. He was running 110 type speed figures. There's no reason he can't be 10 points better this time of year, getting back to the right surface. And it makes me feel even better about it when you start talking about how he wants to marathon. And that is, in fact, what he was running at as a 3-year-old. So he should be bigger, stronger, and he is definitely going to be on my tickets. Just a couple other horses I wanted to mention. I'm not totally dismissing the 7 horse, 911 Turbo, just because he's a horse who is getting better every single time out. He's running better speed figures. He's doing it while stretching out. So it's not like this is a strong grade 2. So he's a horse in just razor sharp form. He's won 4 in a row, 5 out of 6. Obviously against much cheaper company. He hasn't been in this kind of class before, but like I said, not the strongest field. He's going to be a price, so I do want to use him. The other horse I wanted to mention is one I really wanted to make a case for, and then the more I watched the replay of the United Nations, I just couldn't do it, and that's Planetario. He was disappointing that day, frankly. I know we talked about him on the forecast. I wasn't a huge fan of the San Juan Capistrano, but it probably wasn't a whole lot different from this race. So I do think he'll run okay in here. I just prefer others because when I watched that United Nations trip, he had a really nice trip. He looked like he was going to make a move getting through on the inside, just completely flattened out late. So it just seems like he's probably not as good as maybe those running lines make him look.
Yeah, both he and Awfully Naughty have similar form lines, and They're fine. I feel like their form is kind of exposed in these races, but I don't ever think that these marathon turf stakes in California come up so tough that I wouldn't want to consider a new face, because we do see new faces have success in these races. And actually, Awfully Naughty was a new face when he won that grade 2 earlier in the year at 11-1. So I think you want to look at horses like that in races such as this, because they can step up when the division is a little bit light like it is right now. So I didn't want to default to the horses like Awfully Naughty and Planetario that already have that exposed form in these kinds of races, because I think they're going to be underlays in this spot. So, I think we covered just about everybody, Craig. I too looked at the 911 Turbo because his last race was visually impressive. He kind of reminds me of what's the name? The horse that ran in the Sword Dancer last week for Linda Rice, a Pioneering Spirit, because, they've got that similar kind of form where they've just been gradually stepping up out of starter allowance and weaker allowance races, but winning impressively. Pioneering Spirit ran fine in the Sword Dancer. I think he was third, but I mean, no match for a horse like Bolshoi Ballet, who actually has real talent going this distance. And, there probably is no Bolshoi Ballet in this race, though I think there's a possibility Miss the Cut might turn out to be that good. We'll see. But it just feels like it's a significant step up in class for this kind of horse in general, but he did look good last time.
Yeah, same thought. That was the exact same horse I thought of. I would have never pulled the name out of my hat, but yeah, he ran okay. My thoughts were there no bull show ballet, but I do prefer Miss the Cut the most, as I think we both do, even when the day looks good. And I just wanted to point, if I'm going to use another horse, it would be him over a horse like Planetario or Awfully Naughty or especially Gold Phoenix.
Well, let's briefly look back through this sequence and talk a little bit about how we might structure a ticket to attack it. This is the kind of sequence that I might play, Craig, because I think that there are a few races I can narrow down enough, and there are some races where I'm against favorites that I could probably leave off my tickets. So you can start to narrow things down at that point to get to something affordable. I'll admit that before we started recording, I didn't really come up with a draft ticket or anything like that, so I'll kind of be talking about it on the fly, as I imagine you will be too. So I'll throw it to you first, because I imagine we're going to, have similar views of some of these races.
Yeah, this is a race I'll definitely be using Ticket Maker for because every race I have 3 or 4 horses that I want to use, and I'm not going to play one of those cavemen tickets. There's favorites on probably 3 or 4 of the legs. I don't want to play a ticket where I'm going to have 4 favorites come in. I'd rather reduce it down quite a bit. So I'll start with the Del Mar Mile, the Grade 2 turf race. And I like I'm a Gambler, a horse we have shown on the front in the pace projector. He doesn't have to be there, but he can be, and it wouldn't be a bad thing. I definitely think he'll be up close, and I think we haven't seen the best of him. I think he had a little bit of a tough trip last time, second off the layoff, looking for better. He'd be my top pick. I'm also interested in Twisted, and I'm not totally writing off Count again, as I think that last race was just a prep race. In the Torrey Hines, Anywho is my top pick. She's a filly I actually like quite a bit in this spot. I'm not going to totally dismiss Fisa. I think she can run. I prefer her to the 10 horse Ceiling Crusher. But I'm also going to use Flying Connection, the horse that you like, because I think there's a very real chance she could steal this race on the front end. In the Green Flash, I'm going with Cherubic Factor as my top pick at a big price, but this is the one I would probably spread in the most, looking for off the pace horses. He is one, obviously, but also Turn on the Jets. Maybe Beer Can Man. That will depend on how my ticket's playing. Motorius obviously has a shot, and maybe even Lane Way. There's nothing wrong with him either. So this is the race I would go the deepest in, and really do think it's going to get hot on the front end. In the Pacific Classic, I'm focusing on the 3-year-olds, particularly the top two, Go Rocket Ride and Arabian Night. Skinner would definitely be more than a backup if the pace tends to get hot. Definitely have a lot more questions about him. The one thing that drew me to him was the 10-1 morning line. Still not sure that's going to happen given the popularity of John Sheriff's, but he might get a setup in here. And then the last race, just the horses we talked about. I really like Miss the Cut. He would be my top pick. your crazy long shot, I don't think is so crazy at all. I don't think it'll be 50-1, but I think it'll be every bit of 20-1. So I've got no problem with win today. I look for him to run well on the turf. And then I mentioned 911 Turbo is one I think is in really good form, moving forward and not the strongest field. So I could see him taking another step up.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of overlap in the way we're going to structure some of these races. In that first leg, the Del Mar Mile, I kind of want to lean most heavily on I'm a Gambler and Exalted. I'm a Gambler, I think, is the better horse to bet just from a win standpoint, but Exalted, I just think, is likely to win this race and not a horse I want to leave off my tickets. I would use a little bit of twist as well, but I would try to get through this one a little more thinly because I think it's more likely to be won from the front end by those two horses that I'm leaning on. In the Torrey Pines, again, we agree quite a bit. I would probably downgrade Fisa a little more. I think I'm somewhat more against her than you are, Craig. But I do like the 3 Flying Connection. She's a horse that I'm definitely use as an A in this race, especially given the price that she's supposed to be. And the 6 Anywho, I mean, they're the two that I'm most interested in. I would use Ceiling Crusher. I don't know how short a price she's going to be. She's kind of a tough one to get a read on, but I just think she's got the talent to be really dangerous in this race. And then, we didn't mention a horse like the number 4 Coffee in Bed, but if I was going to spread a little more, I could throw a horse like that on my tickets at what could be a bigger price. In the Green Flash, again, I think we've got a similar view that we want the horses that are going to be coming from just off the pace or a little further off the pace. And the two that I would probably lean most towards as potential A's are the 3 Turn on the Jets and the 8 Motorious. I just think that they're going to get the right kind of trips in here. And I know Motorious has the credentials to be effective against a field like this. And then, the others that I would throw in are Beer Can Man, Laneway, and also the 10 Bran. They're kind of the ones that I would feel comfortable getting through this race with. And if somebody wins it on the front end, I mean, kudos to them, but they'll probably knock me out. And then the Pacific Classic, we agree. In equal strength, I'll probably use Go Rocket Ride and Arabian Night. Maybe I think Arabian Night's a slightly more likely winner, but I do think that Go Rocket Ride could be the better price in this race. So I'm going to use the 2 of them. And I'm also going to use Stiletto Boy, probably more as a B-type horse for this sequence. But I would not want to let him knock me out because I'm pretty sure he's going to be a decent price like he always is. And he definitely has the talent if one of those 3-year-olds is not able to step up. And then we'll close things out with the 11th race. I think the number 4 Miss the Cut makes a ton of sense in here. He's the most likely winner in my opinion, and he's a horse that I would feel comfortable having quite a few of my tickets go through. I also will use Win the Day, maybe not equal strength, but he's like the primary backup for me in this Del Mar Handicap because I do think he's going to be the right kind of price. Even if not 50-1, I think he's a horse that's interesting at 18 or 20-1. And then, beyond those two, Craig, it's hard for me to warm up to anybody else enough to, want to upgrade them too much on my tickets. I mean, we mentioned Awfully Naughty and Planetario, but I kind of had somewhat negative takes on them. 911 Turbo maybe is a horse that I could get a little more interested in, even though we've got those reservations about his class level. I would leave Gold Phoenix off my tickets. I think there's going to be a value in beating him in this race. And I'm just not totally convinced about his quality. I think that there's an idea out there that he's better than he actually is. So I'd go more against him in this spot. And, as I talk through it, Craig, this ticket doesn't sound quite as expensive as I expected it to be when we first started handicapping.
No, I'm definitely playing. I mean, if Delmar's gonna put a card together this good, I'm gonna invest a few dollars because I think no matter what you come up with, if you're able to cash, it almost has to pay. I mean, I don't think the favorites are strong enough that you're gonna get a sequence where 3 or 4, or definitely 5 favorites are winning. So I'm really looking forward to this card, even more so than Saratoga. Saratoga's obviously running a big card on Saturday. Didn't quite get the field strength for some of their big races. So Belmar will be the focus for me, and I'm glad we did this. It was a good one to come back. I did want to say I appreciate you taking over for me during my absence, but I had a great time getting back into this.
Yeah, no, this was a fun card to go through with you, and I agree. It's supposed to pay, especially if we're right about beating horses like Fisa and Gold Phoenix. I mean, I think those are the 2 favorites that we're most against in the sequence. That's going to ensure that it pays, because I think those 2 horses are going to be on a lot of people's tickets. Well, Craig, it was great to have you back this week. I hope everybody enjoyed us going through the sequence, and hopefully we gave out some good ideas on this podcast. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll be back with our recap of this week's stakes action coming up next Tuesday.